They passed the cranberry sauce like I wasn't even there. No one noticed the silence sitting on my tongue until the numbers did the talking for me. My name is Zoe. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a small but peaceful apartment on the edge of Seattle. I run an online business from home, a business no one in my family has ever asked about, not even once. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday when I was a kid. Back then, it meant togetherness, smells of cinnamon, the sound of overlapping, conversations, the warmth of being needed in the kitchen. But these days, it just feels like a well-rehearsed play, and I'm always the one who forgot her lines. This year's gathering was at my brother Owen's house. He and his wife just bought a place in the suburbs, the kind with matching lawn chairs and a Pinterest-worthy front porch. The whole family came. Mom brought her famous stuffing. Dad, of course, brought his usual commentary. My older sister, Veronica, showed up last, made her usual late entrance with the kind of flair that made the room pause. I arrived early, like always. Helped in the kitchen, set the table, and made the gravy from scratch because no one else remembered how. Still, I barely got a thank you. Dinner was loud, full of the usual. Career updates, baby milestones, inside jokes I wasn't part of. And then came the comment. It wasn't shouted. No, that would have made it easier to push back. It was dropped in casual conversation, like it wasn't meant to wound. Some people just drift through life, huh? Owen said, laughing lightly while slicing the turkey. No real job, no real roots, just taking up space. Everyone chuckled. No one looked at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I felt it. That internal shift. A quiet snap, not from anger, but from the deep clarity that comes when you realize you'll never earn love where none exists. What none of them knew, not then, was what had been sitting in my bag the entire time. A sealed envelope, a single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't a plan. It was simply the truth, waiting to be found. My place in the family was always quietly assigned to me, though no one ever said it out loud. I wasn't the smart one. That was Veronica. I wasn't the charming one. That was Owen. I was just there. A background character. In someone else's spotlight. Growing up, I learned quickly that praise had a direction. It flowed from my parents toward my siblings, not because they were bad people, but because they didn't even realize they were doing it. Owen won a soccer trophy. He got a celebration dinner. Veronica got into an honors program. They bought her a necklace. I brought home straight A's too, but mine were met with a distracted, "That's nice, Zoe." At first, I tried harder. I thought maybe I just hadn't earned it yet. I joined clubs, stayed up late studying, volunteered at the library, but the bar always moved. If I achieved something, it just meant I'd finally caught up. There was no surprise, no pride, just expectation. It took me longer than I cared to admit to stop chasing their approval. I used to think it was my fault, that I was born missing something vital, a gene for sparkle or ambition or whatever it was that made Owen and Veronica easy to love. But the truth is, I just didn't play the part they had written for me. By the time I was in college, the distance between us had grown, but they barely noticed. Calls home became fewer. Holidays were more about keeping the peace than reconnecting. I learned how to be invisible, even while sitting at the same table. Veronica liked to ask rhetorical questions at family dinners. She'd tilt her head, smiling with just enough bite. "Zoe, are you still doing that internet thing?" No real interest. Just a reminder that my life didn't quite count in their world. My dad, always trying to sound like a sage, once said, "You can't make a living off dreams." I was 23. He didn't know I had already made my first $20,000 that year, but I didn't correct him. There was no point. When you're always underestimated, Your silence becomes your armor. It wasn't just what they said, it was what they didn't. I could be sitting right there, but their stories, their jokes, their updates, they circled around me like I was part of the furniture. They talked about business, politics, real estate, things I had plenty of thoughts on. But no one asked. I stopped offering. Eventually, I stopped trying to be seen at all. And yet, I kept showing up. Part of me still believed in family. Or maybe I believed in the version of it I used to dream about, where someone would finally look across the table and ask, "What about you, Zoe?" Thanksgiving was the sharpest reminder. Year after year, I'd help with dishes, chop vegetables, take coats. I was always useful, never important. I became the quiet presence people were vaguely glad to have around, like the extra folding chair someone forgot to return to the garage. The last few Thanksgivings followed a script. Owen bragged about a new client or car. Veronica detailed her luxury skincare routine. Mom fussed over the turkey. Dad found a new way to say something vaguely, condescending, then acted surprised if it hurt. And me? I smiled. I poured wine. I asked polite questions. I tucked away the sting. But each year, the gap between who they believed I was and who I had actually become grew wider. And still, I let them believe. I let them think I was drifting, aimless, figuring things out. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't need them to know. My life had quietly bloomed away from their gaze. I had clients across the globe. I built my own hours, paid my rent 6 months in advance, invested in things I never imagined owning. But that success was personal, private, sacred, and I knew, deeply, that the moment I brought it to the table, it would be met with suspicion, mockery, or worst of all, disbelief. Like it couldn't possibly be real if I was the one who achieved it, so I kept it close. My world stayed mine. Still, something always shifted in me around Thanksgiving. Like an old bruise being pressed, gently but persistently. I'd pack my overnight bag with pie, polite conversation, and a smile I didn't fully mean. But I never left empty-handed. I always came back with that ache, that quiet echo of not enough, trailing behind me like a coat I couldn't take off. This year, though, I felt it before I even walked through the door, that something had shifted, not just in them, but in me. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry, but I was done hoping. The living room smelled of roasted garlic, clove, and something artificial from the seasonal candle burning on the mantel. Everyone was louder than usual. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the joy of their own voices bouncing off one another. The kind of noise that fills a house but doesn't make room for anyone new to speak. I stayed quiet, content with observing. I always had a seat at the edge of the couch, never quite in the middle of the room or the conversation. My plate rested neatly on my lap. I'd brought a quinoa-stuffed acorn squash I made myself. No one touched it, except me. Owen was retelling a story about some deal he'd closed again. I had heard it at least 3 times over the years, but this time he added a twist about how real success is visible, like a car in the driveway or a Rolex on the wrist. He made a show of checking his watch, just in case we hadn't noticed. Then came the moment that still echoes sometimes when it's quiet at night. Veronica swirled her wine and said, not looking at me, "You know, some people don't want too much. They're just comfortable drifting, floating through life, no goals, no plans, just existing." There was a beat of silence. Then Owen chuckled, like human wallpaper, just sort of there, taking up space. My fork paused mid-air. Dad muttered something about late bloomers, and Mom offered her favorite line, "Not everyone's meant to shine." No one said my name, but it was obvious. They knew, and I knew they knew. I felt my face warm, not with shame, but with that old familiar ache. That slow boil of being talked about, not to, of being measured and found lacking, again and again. Didn't say anything. I smiled softly and kept chewing because I knew something they didn't. Earlier that morning, I had printed something out, not out of ego, not for theatrics, but because I needed to drop it off to my accountant later, in the week. I'd folded it neatly into a plain envelope and slipped it into my bag. It was a quarterly summary, black and white, clean, factual. It showed the revenue my business had made in just the last 3 months. 6 figures. Clean. Quiet. Real. I had forgotten about it until now. The universe has a strange way of tipping its hand. After dinner, the kids started running around the house. I stayed seated, still invisible, still expected to help clean, but no one asked, so I didn't offer. I watched. One of the younger nieces, Ellie, must have been bored. She plopped down on the couch next to me and reached for my bag, probably looking for gum or a phone to play with. I gently told her to be careful, but before I could stop her, she had unzipped the main compartment. The envelope slid out. It fluttered to the floor like a feather, landing face up. Ellie picked it up with innocent curiosity and opened it before I could react. She didn't know what she was holding, of course. She was maybe 9, but Owen's wife, Paige, saw the numbers when Ellie turned to ask, "What's this?" Paige reached for the paper. She's the nosy type, always has been. She skimmed it once, and her eyes narrowed slightly, like she wasn't sure what she was seeing. She scanned it again. Then, a pause, a blink. And her voice, higher than usual, cut into the buzz of the room. "Zoe, is this yours?" The air shifted. All the casual noise stilled, like someone had lowered the volume dial on the evening. Owen looked up. Veronica stopped talking mid-sentence. I reached out and took the paper from her hands gently. I folded it once, then twice. "Yes," I said. Just that. No explanation, no elaboration, just confirmation. There was a beat. Then Owen laughed awkwardly. "What is it? Like a fake invoice or something?" Paige wasn't laughing. She tilted her head. "No, it's a real bank statement. Everyone's..." Eyes were on me now. Really on me. For the first time in years. Veronica sipped her wine, watching me like I was suddenly a stranger. "You've been making this kind of money?" she asked, her voice flat. I nodded. "For a while now." Mom looked almost offended. Like my success had somehow insulted her. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her tone brittle. "Because you never asked," I thought. "Because you only see what fits your story." "I just didn't feel the need," I said aloud. More silence. Not awkward, threatened, confused, disoriented. Owen leaned back. "Wait, doing what exactly? That online thing?" "That online thing?" I repeated, smiling faintly. He exhaled. "Wow, I mean, good for you, I guess." The way people say good for you when they don't mean it. Dad muttered something again about luck. Veronica offered a brittle laugh. Paige looked like she was trying to recalculate her place in the family tree. "And me?" I stood up. I didn't make a speech. I didn't throw accusations or ask for apologies. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my coat from the back of a chair, and quietly pulled my keys from my bag. I turned to my mom. "Thanks for dinner," I said. Then to the rest of them, "I think I'll head out early this year." I didn't slam the door. I didn't storm out. I left the way you leave a room that's grown too small to hold you. They had always assumed I was beneath them. They never once considered I had simply been growing out of sight. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the year I turned 25. The sky outside my apartment window was a flat, indifferent gray, the kind that feels like time is standing still. I remember sitting at the edge of my bed, holding my phone long after the call ended. My dad's voice still rang in my ears. You're wasting your potential, Zoe. This online nonsense isn't a real future. That call wasn't new. It was just the latest version of a lecture I'd heard for years, masked as concern, but laced with quiet shame. What he didn't know was that I had just landed my first major contract, a 6-month project with a client overseas that would more than cover my rent for the rest of the year. I hadn't told him because I already knew the script. He wouldn't ask how I did it. He'd ask why it wasn't a real job. I placed my phone face down and let the silence settle. That was the moment something snapped into place, not in anger, but in clarity. I realized I'd been building my life on borrowed permission, waiting for someone else's approval before I called anything I did a success. But that day, I stopped waiting. I started keeping notebooks, rows of plans, schedules, invoices. I mapped out my entire quarter, then the next one. I watched tutorial after tutorial, often late into the night with cold tea sitting beside me, untouched. I turned down parties, skipped holidays, and canceled dates. Not because I didn't want connection, but because I needed a foundation first. No one in my family knew what I was doing. They thought I was floundering, figuring things out. But I was building, quietly, deliberately. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, mornings I doubted everything. But I kept going, not for revenge, not even for validation. I kept going because somewhere deep inside me, past all the layers of invisibility, there was a voice that whispered, "You were never meant to beg for belonging." The turning point came 6 months later, when the client renewed our contract and referred me to 2 more companies. I opened my banking app one morning and saw numbers I'd never seen before. And instead of joy, I felt something deeper. Relief. Relief that I could breathe without strings. That I could build a future without anyone else's blueprint. I remember sitting at the coffee table that night, journal open, writing just one line. I don't need their applause. I just need my freedom. From that point on, I stopped bringing up my work at family dinners. I stopped offering details, trying to explain or translate what I did into terms they could understand. I realized that trying to be seen by people who were committed to misunderstanding me wasn't a strength. It was self-betrayal. And so I stayed, silent. Not out of shame, but out of strength. I celebrated my small wins alone. I built systems, hired help, and invested in coaching. My world grew richer, fuller, but it remained mine. Private. Sacred. When Veronica posted her engagement photos, I sent a kind comment. When Owen bought a new car, I clicked the like button. I participated, but I no longer waited for an invitation into the center. I had created my own center. And yet, there were still moments, quiet ones, like Thanksgiving mornings when I would pack a homemade pie and wonder if maybe this time would be different. If someone were to say, "Tell us what you've been working on." They never did. But I stopped needing them to. That Tuesday afternoon stayed with me, not because of what my father said, but because of what I finally heard in the silence that followed. My own voice. My own vision. I wasn't drifting. I was arriving. I don't remember who broke the silence first. Maybe it was Paige, holding the paper in both hands like it had started to hum. Or maybe it was Owen, fidgeting with the cuff of his shirt like it had suddenly shrunk around his wrist. But someone finally asked, their voice small and unsure. "Is this real?" I didn't sigh. I didn't smirk. I just nodded. Yes, it's real. And then the energy in the room changed, sharply, quietly, like someone had cracked a window in the middle of winter. No one wanted to look directly at me, and yet, no one could look away. A kind of awkward awe sat between us, thick as gravy. Veronica blinked, hard. "But how? You never—" "I didn't think it mattered," I said softly. No one ever asked. That landed. I saw it ripple in her eyes, that first flicker of awareness. She looked away, reaching for her glass like it could anchor her. Owen gave a half laugh, the kind meant to brush things off. I mean, it's not like a real business, right? Like, you're not managing a whole team or anything. I am, I said. Actually, I just hired my 4th contractor last month. Dad cleared his throat. Well, that's something. But maybe don't get too comfortable. These things don't always last. He meant it as wisdom. He always did. But I heard the fear underneath. The fear that his version of the world might no longer be the only one that mattered. Mom tried to pivot. She reached for my hand gently. Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? We would have supported you. I looked at her hand in mine. It was warm, familiar, but not safe. I stopped. Needing your support a long time ago, I said. Not with bitterness, but with a kind of final tenderness. I just wanted space to grow, quietly, on my terms. She let go. The kids, blissfully unaware of the shift, were playing in the hallway, their laughter echoing faintly. For a brief second, I watched them and felt a wave of something close to grief. Not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd kept trying to earn long after it was clear I never would. That's when I stood up. I didn't make a speech. There was no movie moment, no dramatic delivery, just my voice, steady and clear. I'm not staying for dessert. Veronica blinked. You're leaving? I nodded, reaching for my coat. Yes, I think this will be my last Thanksgiving with everyone. There was a pause, the kind that dares someone to challenge you. Owen looked mildly offended. Seriously? You all have each other, I said. You always have. And I finally realized I don't need to keep showing up to prove I deserve a seat. Mom started to speak, but I raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to close the moment. I'm not angry, I said. And I'm not asking anyone to change. I just finally see the room for what it is. And it's not meant for me. I reached into my bag one last time and pulled out a folded check. This is for the catering bill, I said, placing it on the side table near the door. You won't need to divide it. Veronica looked down at it, eyes widening slightly at the amount. You don't have to, she started. I know, I said. That's why it means something. I walked to the door, hand on the knob, before turning back one last time. You've all called me a lot of things over the years, I said softly. But the part that hurt the most was never the words. It was the silence, the refusal to see me. They didn't respond. Not really. Just a few stares, a cough, a fidget. But that silence, for the first time, didn't hurt. It clarified. I wish you well, I said. And I meant it. Then I left. No tears, no drama. Just the sound of the door clicking closed behind me and the wind brushing against my cheek like a quiet applause from the universe. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and let myself breathe. Not a breath of relief, a breath of arrival. That was the moment I knew I didn't need to be invited back. I had already outgrown the room. No one called me the next day. No text, no voicemail, not even a passive-aggressive group message pretending nothing had happened. Just silence. But for the first time, the silence didn't sting. It felt clean, like fresh air after a long storm. In the past, that silence would have kept me up at night. I would have replayed the moment I left, wondering if I should have said less or more or something different. I would have stared at my phone, hoping for a message that never came. Some tiny gesture of recognition. An apology, even a reluctant one, but not this time. This time, I went for a walk. The streets were quiet, glazed with fallen leaves that crunched softly under my boots. The cold air burned just enough to make me feel awake. Present. I stopped by a small cafe near my apartment, the kind where no one knows your name, but they always get your order right. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, and let myself be still. No performance, no persona, just me. That weekend, I opened my laptop and looked at the numbers from the last quarter. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because it reminded me that I had built something real, something that fed me, clothed me, and gave me agency over my own time. A life I had shaped with my own hand. I started planning a trip I had postponed for years, Florence in the spring. No itinerary, just sun, old buildings, good food, and space to breathe. Maybe I'd even stay a while. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Around the same time, I also began renting a co-working space for women-owned businesses. A quiet corner with high ceilings, natural light, and a whiteboard I could fill with ideas that belonged entirely to me. The space became a sanctuary, not just for work, but for vision, and I turned 35 a month later. It was the first birthday I spent completely alone and the most peaceful one I can remember. No last-minute family call, no forced brunch or uncomfortable cake-cutting ceremony. I took myself to the coast instead, booked a quiet cabin overlooking the water. I brought a journal, a few books I'd been saving, and a bottle of wine. I watched the tide come in and out for hours without checking the time once. I wrote one sentence in that journal, near midnight. They never had to believe in me. I just had to stop believing them. That realization didn't come with fireworks or fanfare. It arrived gently, like the tide receding with each breath, leaving behind only what was true. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was free. There is a kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't chase validation. It simply walks away when it's no longer respected and never looks back. That's who I am now. Not the forgotten sister. Not the background character. Not the waste of space they once labeled me. I'm a woman who built her own life quietly, who found peace in solitude, and who finally understood that being unseen by them didn't mean I was invisible. It meant I was looking in the wrong direction. And now I face forward.